Finally got your first leadership gig, loving the new role, but feeling the pressure of your new responsibilities and all that expectation to perform? Well, don't worry, you're not alone. Crossing the chasm from a technical role to leadership, from doing stuff to managing and leading people, is the toughest challenge any leader must make. Welcome to the Human Edge Show, the podcast dedicated to help you do just that, successfully cross the doing to leading chasm. Campbell Such here, Chief Chasm Crossing Guide. I've made all the mistakes so you don't have to. I want to help you learn those lessons much more easily by sharing my experiences and talking with brilliant people who have already figured it out. You'll get great actionable tips, strategies, and techniques to make the transition so much easier and faster for you. Now let's get to it. Hi, I'm Campbell Such. Welcome to the Human Edge Show. I'm super excited to be talking with Hema Patel today. Welcome to the show, Hema.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
It's great to have you here. Hema is Managing Director for Database Solutions, a division of the global ICT business NTT. Hema is a business leader with a passion for transformation and innovation. She has had key roles across media, technology, and the telecommunications sectors, and has a unique background as a chartered accountant and in senior leadership roles. She has a passion for building great teams and delivering amazing results for those teams and for the organizations that she works with. Hema has a clear perspective of modern leadership, having experienced firsthand so many of the challenges that we all face these days that are associated with that. So welcome, Hema. Just to get started, what's something that not many people might know about you?
The possibilities are endless. People are often surprised when I tell them that I didn't buy my first car until I was 30. Now, we don't need to talk about how many years ago that was, but it's unusual. I mean, I got my license when I was 16 or 15 or whatever the ages were in those days. And I had no need to buy a car. I either shared one with other people, or it was funny because it's one of those almost like a rite of passage. But for me, that didn't happen until slightly later in life.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because cars are something that so many of us think are going to be transitional in our, transformational in our lives, and all this stuff's going to happen, and often it doesn't quite work out like that. And I guess not having bought a car for that long, you might have saved a little bit of money that you could have done some other things with.
It was never a monetary thing, I don't think. But I lived reasonably centrally, and I managed to kind of either walk or take the train, or I got where I needed to get to. And I just didn't want to have more cars on the road, contribute to that, and then I did. So
yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. In terms of your leadership career and the pathway that you've taken, what were some of the first steps that you took into leadership, and how did you make that decision to go down that path rather than down a technical path or into something non-leadership?
Oh, I'm not sure it was entirely my decision. I was in London, and my boss at the time said, "You need to recruit somebody." Okay. How do I do that? What does that mean? So I think that I don't know if I consciously, actively went into leadership as much as I was thrown in the deep end and then had to figure it out as I went. So that was my very first step. I'm sure I was a terrible leader in those days because I just didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. But it was also one of the most rewarding periods of my life, because it was trial by fire. It was just get in and survive and figure it out as you go. And I'm sure not everybody likes to learn that way, but it was certainly something that I really look back on fondly, actually.
It's interesting, isn't it? Some of the biggest challenges in our lives at the time we may not have enjoyed going through them, but when we look back on them, they're brilliant experiences, and we learn so much from those things. And the being thrown in the deep end is not uncommon for probably the majority of leaders, I believe. What do you feel, looking back now, what do you think some of the biggest mistakes that you made early in your career, that knowing that might help some new leaders in the transition into their careers, especially if they've been thrown in the deep end and aren't necessarily getting the support that might help them make that transition a bit more easy?
Oh my God, like I think I have made every single mistake you could possibly have made. Pretty sure I will have. So I think that list is going to be really long, Campbell. But some of those early mistakes, I think, when you think you can do the role better than the people that you're going to hire because you've been there longer, is a really dangerous trap. You fall into the trap of doing, and it took me a very long time to let go, and actually sit back and to the point now where I'm not even sure that I kind of do anything at all because I've got some fantastic leaders in my business, and they do the work. So it's I guess it's come 360 for me, but in those very early days it was very hard to step back.
Yep. Yeah, hanging on and doing things. It's interesting. It's a theme that comes through in a lot of the interviews that I do for the podcast, is that the challenge of knowing that you can do it better than the person that you're passing the job on to, and being able to let go enough to help them become good and help them through that process of becoming better, and you letting go. That's and the feeling of your worth comes from the stuff that you do, not from the stuff that you help other people to do for you.
The other thing, actually, when you say that, you mentioned in the intro that my background is finance, and now I'm managing a technology business. And so I'm now in a sort of situation where I actually don't know how to do some of the stuff, and therefore I have no choice but to sort of step back. So it's I think when you're a leader in your function in the area where you've got functional expertise, it is harder to let go. But now I'm a leader in an area where I don't necessarily have functional expertise, and my most recent leadership roles, including this one, include managing a bunch of different functions. And I used to manage a marketing team, and I'm not a marketer. In the same way that I manage a software delivery team, and I'm not a software developer. So it's interesting how those things evolve, actually.
Yep. And what do you think the thing that's made it easier for you to step into those roles where you don't necessarily have deep technical knowledge in that particular sphere or in that particular area? How have what's helped you take on successful leadership of those teams when you don't? It's a lot harder to make really good decisions when you don't have that deep technical knowledge.
Yeah, I think I'm a naturally quite a curious person, and also I'm a problem solver. And when you put those two things together, I don't think the subject matter even matters, because there's always a problem to solve, and I've got curiosity around things. And you put those two things together, and I feel like I can figure it out now. And it's about asking questions, and it's about having a bunch of very smart people around you, around me, and knowing that together we can come to an outcome. Actually, it helps when you don't have the technical expertise, because you can ask really obvious questions, and that when you're if you're thick in the detail of something, you might not have stepped back to think about those things in the same way. So it's funny, actually.
When in your early roles, before you moved into some of these roles where you don't have that deep technical expertise, were you more technically proficient in that space? And if you were, how did you step back, and how did you let go of things? What's the process for someone that comes in with a deep technical knowledge and is struggling with that letting go? Any thoughts around what that process might be, and how you get around the challenge of letting go?
One of the things that for me is really key is understanding what your manager needs from you, because the manager is unlikely to need you to keep doing the technical thing that you were doing, whether you're a developer or a tester or whomever. They are more likely to want you to step back and look at things strategically, or work with the content team, or the finance team, or whomever, to get to a more strategic, or kind of more of a business outcome. That's always a really good one for me, because you kind of almost removing yourself from having to make that decision, and sort of saying, well, what do you need from me? And am I delivering to those things? And if I'm not, then I probably need to go and do the job that I'm being, I've been promoted to do or been paid to do, rather than the one that I used to do. And that's quite a, it's almost like an objective a forced way to step back, because it is really hard to step back when you're in it. But you can kind of leverage other people in the business to help you do that.
And so just so I'm sure that I've understood you. What you're looking up into the person that's managing and leading you, and asking them, or asking yourself, what do they want, and then presumably actually asking them with your curiosity what they're looking for, and then validating that, and then using that as a tool to help you then step away, or to focus on the things that they're expecting, which will then help you to step away.
Yeah, and it's so it's not necessarily always upwards management as well. It's also your peer group. So if you're on a leadership team and you've got a bunch of peers, it's understanding what those peers need from you or your area as well. So you're kind of getting it's almost like you're understanding what your job description is by seeking counsel of the business or the people around you, rather than sort of leaving it to your own devices. Not that we can't make these things up ourselves, but actually our focus might not be there, because we need someone to help us understand where the focus should be.
Right. Yeah. That absolutely makes sense. The knowledge is there. You just got to uncover it, and your natural curiosity would make that a lot easier for you. When you talk about curiosity, some people have got a lot of curiosity. I'm very driven by curiosity. One of my sort of underlying traits. What do you do if you don't? What do you do if you don't have a whole lot of curiosity, or how can you foster curiosity if that's not a strong point for you? And what are some of the things that you've found that have helped you in that space?
Asking questions. Curiosity is just about asking questions. It's about, why does it work like that? If you change this parameter over here, what do we think the outcome is going to be over there? And that's about, setting hypotheses, for example. Or in one of my previous roles, we were dabbling with adding captions to our service, and so the questions might have been, well, what's it going to drive from a commercial perspective? How difficult is it technically? Is it going to cost us more? So I think it's just having the ability, I suppose, and everyone's got it, to ask questions, and then you kind of learn something. I remember talking to somebody in my test team once, and she said, Hema, she was asking me about my career and asking about, she was, I think, keen to move beyond her sort of daily testing role. And I encouraged her to be more curious about she was testing apps. And I said, look, the thing that you've got to think about is, what does your manager think about? Your manager thinks about app upgrades, app installs, download time, all of those things. And I think it's, I encourage her just to ask questions about, why we're adding a feature to the Samsung app, or why the Panasonic app didn't have the same feature, or how we might approach something differently for iPad versus Android, or some of those kinds of questions. And it sort of helped her to sort of look at a world beyond the one that she was looking at, which is, if I run a script, is it going to come through clear or not? And sometimes it's just sort of lifting above to that next level of detail, which kind of is almost what I was saying earlier in relation to getting out of the detail, is looking kind of, around, above and sideways, to understand the impact of the thing that we're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, well, that's really powerful. It's so easy when you're in a technical role to be focused on what it is that you're doing, and not to be able to kind of come up to that next level of just awareness and thinking, and to be able to recognize the value of doing that, and then having some tools around questions and questioning techniques, and not just asking a question, but then listening to the answer and asking the next question, and maybe the one after that follows on from that, can really help give you some insight into things that you might not otherwise have got. You talked just a little bit before about having great people around you, and the rest of the team doing the things which mean that you don't actually do a whole lot, but that's kind of how did you create that team, and what do you look for in doing that, and what was the process that you went to help get those people around you so that you can focus on doing what you need to do, which is the stuff you do best around the strategic level?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I have now built two really great teams in two successive businesses that I've managed. And when I think about how or what, it's about setting expectations. It's not about trying to be mates. It's about building trust. It's a great book, Five Dysfunctions of a Team. I'm sure lots of people have read it.
Patrick
I actually
Lencioni, right?
only, what's that?
Patrick Lencioni.
That's right.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
only read it really recently, like in the last 18 months. And it was just, yeah, quite eye-opening. And actually some of the things that I actively, consciously work on are some of the principles in that book. So building trust. If you've got a team that trusts each other, then we can build psychological safety. If we have psychological safety, people air their opinions and thoughts on a particular thing in the business, and if people are brave enough to air their thoughts because of they trust the people that they're surrounding themselves with, you get to a really good business outcome, or outcome for the business. And it's so it's about, for me, it's been about really trusting the people that I work with, and trust unearned. It's almost like I trust you implicitly. I will always have your back. Now go on and do the thing that we said we were going to do together. And it's fascinating how empowering that is for people. And I know that if my boss said that to me, just go and do I trust you, just go and do what you need to do. If you've got any problems, come back and let me know and I'll help you out. Like, that is absolute gold in a team. So I try and actively practice that.
Yeah, I've found that's an incredibly powerful thing too. Trust is super important. Psychological safety, which I hadn't really considered for a long time in my career in terms of naming it, but that ability to be able to voice your opinion and know that it will be heard, and and that there's not going to be the comeback that might be, well, we're just not going to take any notice, and then it gets acted on. And it may not be that any particular idea that you put forward gets acted on, but you know that it's been heard and considered, which is really powerful. And then knowing that within a team that you can share your views and disagree, which kind of leads into conflict and managing tension within teams. Have you got any thoughts around how to set up an environment and how to help individual team members manage conflict within teams?
Oh, that's such a good question. I smiled. I don't know if you noticed, I smiled to myself there, because I'm not the person that shies away from conflict. So conflict comes easy to me, and I've had to actually tame that right down, coming into more senior roles, because you can't have that environment. However, I also recognize there are people that absolutely hate conflict. And so for me, working with people who are like that, I need to kind of coax it out of them a bit more, because they have an opinion and it's going to be valid and they want to hear it. But if they feel confronted in a way, they're probably not going to share what they were thinking. And so I think it's about understanding who fits into which bucket. And there are numbers of buckets, not just the two that I've outlined there.
Yeah.
And then sort of playing to that. So I've got this one guy on my team who's who often not share in the moment, but we'll think about it for 24 hours, whatever it is, and come back the next day and go, actually, that thing that we were talking about yesterday, here's what I think. And so and I know that you'll do that. And so within the meeting in real time, I won't push him for a response, because I just know that, he's a thinker. And there's others who will really happy to have a conversation and share some ideas. So I think it's understanding, who those people are. It's understanding who you are as a leader as well. And I recognize that I am not shy of conflict. But I do tone it down, because it is not it is very helpful when things need to be resolved with somebody that is high conflict, because two people who do not shy away from conflict can actually have that really open conversation, but not everybody is like that.
Yeah. And then it's facilitating an open conversation. So conflict's it's an interesting term, isn't it? Because the definition of conflict can be a really negative one. I prefer to look at it as being holding opposing or holding differing views, and being able to then have a conversation, discussion that doesn't lead to escalating emotional states that can end up with both sides being heard and possibly a better solution than either of them would have got to alone. And if you shy away from conflict, you may never get there. So helping people, building the environment, that's a really powerful thing. So that's really great to hear. In terms of your career as you sort of started to take the steps up, what could have really helped you in terms of support from your manager or the person that was that you reported to? You talked about the first role you were thrown in the deep end, and that happens a lot. And you mentioned that if someone had said, "Look, I trust you to do it, just get on and do it." What could have made a big difference for you in terms of support from your manager, so that as a leader of leaders, what are some of the things to consider that would help you bring a new hire, a new recruit, a new leader in particular from a technical role into a leadership role, where the skills that got them to be really good as a technician, as a technical expert, aren't the skills that are going to help them be a great leader?
I think a little bit of counsel, if that makes sense. I remember promoting somebody, and there were some things in the role that I really needed from him. He was moving into a different role, and I'm not sure that he might have got there without a little bit of coaching. So it was kind of just sort of presenting some of the issues that existed in the team, and just calling those things out early, and then working with the person to sort of help figure those things out, I think. So perhaps that's about setting expectations really early on. And I remember actually one thing I often ask in interviews is, what are your expectations of my first 3 months if I'm applying for a new role? And really early on, you can kind of get a sense of actually what you're supposed to be doing. So the expectation setting is really important, and it's being brave enough to ask the question, because the danger in not asking the question is that you sort of find yourself in a role that based on a job description, and actually not necessarily delivering to the brief that your manager actually wants. Those things can be different. The words on the piece of paper on the job description might look like all the things that you can do, but actually, it might be, I don't know, having a P&L ownership, but actually what your manager might actually require you to do is, I need to maintain growth year on year, or a 5% increase in this revenue line, or I need you to look at where you can shave some cost out. And those things aren't written on a job description. It's about, well, actually, what do you need me to be delivering? So I think that both as a person talking to their manager and a leader talking to their team, setting those expectations up front just means that nobody's going to be disappointed at the other end.
Yep. Well, yeah, that's great. From the point of view of where you are now, looking back on your career, which I'm sure has taken some twists and turns as you've gone through there, are there any epiphanies that you've had through your career that would be really helpful for someone on their first steps and perhaps as they're going through their career into leadership?
Yeah, there's a couple. There's one, I think, is really tuning into when you've seen really good leadership, and what is it about that good leadership that really appealed to you, that you really liked, and being really, actually sort of thinking about those things and recognizing them. I had one of my previous leaders was, oh my gosh, he was amazing, and I'll still, I still tell him so. And some of it was understanding what it was about his leadership that made me so motivated and driven to work for him, and then trying to emulate that in my own leadership style to go, well, I want my people to feel that way because I know how good that feels. So some of it is recognizing it in others, and then figuring out if that's a thing that also can be natural to your own style. So that was the one thing. The other thing is probably less of an epiphany and more advice that one of my previous CEOs gave me. And I think we were roaring on about this, this women in leadership thing, and it was 4 or 5 years ago, and it was all very early, and it's a whole bunch of stuff we were talking about. And he said, and it threw me. He said, Hema, he's like, you're always going to be measured on your results. He's like, don't worry about that other stuff. He said, the other stuff will come, but you're going to be measured on your results. And it just threw me, because it took everything else out of the conversation. And so I think as a leader, delivering to the results or the expectations is the most important thing. And you forget about that. And because I think we get tied up in people management and all of those things, doing performance reviews and one-on-ones and all of those things, which are, by the way that you deliver your results. But actually, when you think about the greater good or the bigger goal, some of the things, the daily challenges that we have, almost become moot, because you don't need to worry about them so much if they are or aren't delivering to the goal. It was those are two big ones for me.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? And it's kind of keeping your eye on the big picture, or the big piece that you've got to go after, and then your role is to make sure you're able to do that. But it's what do you do underneath all of that to make that work? Yeah. And some of the things that appear really important in the moment, if you look back in a week, a month, or a year, probably aren't as important. That's what I'm getting from what you've just said, as you might think at the time. That's cool. In terms of one of the Gallup's, there's a really interesting statistic out of some research by Gallup, which is that 82% of hires into management are wrong. And whether you question that or not, even if it's wrong by a percentage, it's still a massive number of people that end up in leadership and management roles that shouldn't be there, or aren't necessarily best set up to deliver great results and build great teams and have their team members talk about them as a leader the way you've talked about some of the great leaders that you've had and that you've worked for. Do you have any thoughts on how you can identify people with leadership potential early in their, as early as possible in their careers, and then also how do you then help those people that perhaps aren't best suited for that recognize that the best role for them isn't into leadership because that's just not their thing, and that they'd be better in a technical role, in amongst all of the other challenges which are around credibility and status and kudos and money, which is often where the leadership path drives us. And a lot of organizations aren't set up to make that decision moot around the financial and status piece, because it pushes everyone to make a decision to go into management. So how do you identify those people who might go into leadership, and what do you do to help the others go to the place that they're best suited for, and where they will get so much more satisfaction and feelings of fulfillment and achieve? Big question, I know. There's probably a whole lot to unpack in there.
There's lots of pieces to it, I think.
Yeah.
Quite often, especially in technology, leaders are created or promoted because they have such strong technical leadership and understanding. And often technical teams prefer to have a strongly technical leader. And so these things kind of self-perpetuate in some ways, I think. But not all people who are very strong technically are cut out for leadership. They either don't care enough about building teams and people leadership, or they think that the technical skills are enough for them to be a leader. So I think there's almost like a misunderstanding between those two things. Now, the second part of your question was about how do you weed them out, for lack of better words.
Yeah, it's not really about weeding them out. It's really finding the right path for you. And as a person, are you best to move into a leadership role because people and getting things done through people and with other people is a real strength that you have, or is your strength really in the technical space?
Yeah, so maybe not weeding out, perhaps it's categorizing.
Yeah.
But I think it is, so the way that I can pick someone who might be a really good leader is actually their care for others, and it's their wanting to help people outside of their teams, or help the greater good, or they might have an idea about some great team bonding building thing or something, but they're the people that think about people. And
Nice.
so they've almost got a natural affinity for leadership in some ways, because they intrinsically think about people. And that doesn't mean that people that don't think about others don't make good leaders, but it might not be as natural to them. And the conversations and I've had many of these conversations over time, is actually, what are you happy doing? What's the thing that you really want to do in 3 or 5 years' time? Quite often they'll say, I want to be a CTO or a CIO, and I'll say, what is it that appeals about that? I want to lead teams. Okay, and so then the next things that we'll talk about are things like, well, you need to start thinking about strategy, and you can break that stuff down. So if you're a test manager, what is your strategy for the next 12 months that's going to help our business achieve its vision and purpose? And people either think that way or they don't. And so it's both about thinking about the bigger picture as much as it is about caring for people. And the care for people is just the natural affinity, or is not natural for everybody. And if you're not necessarily those two people, I wonder if perhaps a very senior technical role is the right thing, because senior technical roles are actually really important, and they might not come with leadership, but they can still help drive a business forward. So I think it's playing to people's strengths.
Yep.
And recognizing when people, people in the team might sway one way or another.
Yeah, that's great insight. An affinity for people and having a bigger picture vision, as opposed to perhaps thinking about things and maybe a bigger picture vision, because a bigger picture vision could take you into a technical senior architect or a high level technical role. The challenges are just around the which way do you go. So that's great. Hema, this has been outstanding. There's been some fantastic insight. Is there anything I haven't asked you just before we wrap up that I should have, or any other points you'd like to make before we wrap up?
No, I think there's one thing that I've started saying a bit more, so I'm going to say it again here, which is, and I think this is to encourage people who might not naturally feel that they are set out for leadership, which is that you can't be what you can't see. And so I think if you feel uncomfortable, because there's a whole lot of people out there that are feeling reluctant about leadership, don't know if they've got the right skills, just reluctant. But actually, for me, it was hugely uncomfortable stepping into leadership, and now I embrace it, because I know that there are other people who could also do it, but it's for them to have the self-belief, I think, to know that they can. So I think just surround yourself with really good people. Always get good advice from people that you trust, that have the right, that want the best for you, and just get on and go there. If you feel passionate about it, do it.
Yeah, wow, that's great. Do you think there's a way? One of the things I've wrestled with is that there's a great book by a guy called Daniel Gilbert who wrote a book called Stumbling on Happiness, and the thesis of the book, it's a great read, is that fundamentally as humans, we really don't know how we're going to truly feel about something until we actually do it. We might think we know how we're going to feel, but until we do it, we don't know how we're going to feel. And you think about your transition, you got thrown in the deep end and you were reluctant, and there was all of that. There would have been, I can imagine, because I've been there as well, how challenging that was, and how you don't have the confidence to do something when you haven't done it before. And so is there a way that you've ever seen, or that you could suggest, that might help people who might be really good leaders but are reluctant to do it, that with a little bit of a insight into what it's actually like might go, wow, this is for me, and then start on that journey. Or alternatively might go, yeah, I'm never going to do that. That's not where I want to go. And I haven't found an answer to that, but I'd love to hear your thoughts if you've got anything that you could add into that.
Yeah, I've got a view or a thought, which is to look for projects within your organization. So if there's a small project that you might think, actually, I could probably run that project along with the project team might only be 2 or 3 or 5 people, and it might be a 3-month project. I would look for opportunities to test yourself out. I was once upon a time put in as acting CEO, and at the time I just didn't know what to make of this acting word, but actually it was a really nice opportunity for me to step into a role and see if I could do it. And so I think just look for those opportunities. There are always opportunities to try something out for a little while, and then you can go back to your regular gig. But to your point, Campbell, you might discover something about yourself that you didn't know. But I think just sort of challenge yourself to do it in a small way before you do it in a big way.
Yeah, fantastic. And then and the great thing with that too, because one of the big challenges is if you get put into a leadership role and it's not for you and you really miss the tools and you want to be back in that technology role, almost always it causes massive stress, ends up with a team that's perhaps struggling and demotivated, and often ends up with that person leaving the organization when they were in fact one of the best technical experts in the business. And so you lose all the way around. Mm-hmm. With the suggestions that you've just made, it's a step in, and you can take a step back and assess without having made a full-time commitment. So that's fantastic. Hema, thank you very much. This has been wonderful. There's been some great insight. I've really enjoyed our chat, and look forward to doing it again sometime. Thanks very much.
Thanks for having me, Campbell. Cheers.
Bye. Thanks for listening. If you have a friend or a colleague who would benefit from this episode, please pass the word along. If you have a friend or a colleague who would not benefit, but you haven't been in touch with them for a while, give them a call. iTunes reviews are great to get the word out and to help me create the show that's most useful for you. And if you're frustrated or having challenges or would like some help, guidance, assistance with your first leadership role, then check out integrationcatalyst.com in the link in the podcast notes below. Or pass this on to your boss to nudge them to get you the help you really need to cross the doing to managing chasm and get you powered up on your leadership and management journey. Oh, and if you want to make sure you don't miss an episode, hit subscribe. Until next time.